Mr. Kimmel.
This item also was tabled for the same reason from the last meeting. We'd like to move and then speak briefly. Resolve that a sum not to exceed $550,233 be transferred from contingency to the police department to cover drop in severance payments and anticipated overtime wage settlement.
I could have voted on it.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
There's a question on the floor on whether or not I should have voted for this last bill. Technically, I could have voted for the contract. I decided not to because as a family member of a police officer,
If I recall, it would have no effect on
it
retired
had absolutely
officers.
no effect on me. I just didn't want it to seem a certain way. But I could vote for this.
If I recall, it has no effect on retired officers.
Absolutely no.
So you're okay to vote on it?
The contract has nothing, the new contract has nothing to do with my health benefits, my father's or brothers or anyone.
You're just voting on money to be transferred for current officers, not...
Yes, but there was a question on this side.
So, Mr. Kimmel, would you continue?
Sorry.
Okay, I read the item. I know there was a little back and forth over there. You're with us on this?
We're
Okay,
good.
Okay, if I may just speak briefly, this is, I call this like indirectly related to contracts and policy. This is money to cover unanticipated retirements, some anticipated overtime, which I believe is the result of the retirements, and the need to have new officers go to the police academy, severance payments to drop employees. It's a little bit of a lot of things that the police require because of the retirements, 3 unanticipated retirements and the drop employees. So I'll move the item.
Any further, did you have any further comment, or?
No.
Okay. Ms. Bowman.
Thank you. And I actually am going to say a few things, and I'm glad to hear that one of my colleagues is just thinking the same way. You know, we just have the same perception and feelings, you know, just from things that go on in this city. But, you know, we've just been watching the amount of money that has been allocated to the police department increase, while other areas we don't see a response, which my colleague alluded to, you know. And as a representative of the community, I know others are asking, you know, what is actually going on here? You know, when we ask for money for a social program in our community or an educational program in our community, the response that we get is there's a lack of funding, okay? So, but tonight we're here to consider, between the last item and this item, over $1 million in funding for the police department, which does include overtime pay, okay? And at the same time, we're still waiting on that analysis of whether or not overtime pay can be curbed by hiring more officers. So right now, we're still out here. We asked for more information that we still have not received, okay? So, you know, the city does have other financial needs, and there are other places where we still need to spend other money, you know? And in order for me to support something, what I need to see is a working relationship and some collaboration between all the council members, the mayor, and the department heads, which we do not see, you know, so that we can figure out how we can stop wasting funding so that there is money left over to fund social programs, which there is, apparently there is not whenever we ask. You know, and the reason being is, and I want to go back to, you know, the reasons we get when we ask for funding. The reasons we get for denying the funding is, you know, there's no funding. However, the more cost-effective option is actually to invest in education and the social social programs rather than the justice system. So I don't understand, if we have a money problem, why we're throwing more money at the police department instead of actually focusing on creating programs and focusing more on funding education opportunities like Head Start. So we saw Head Start, which actually, under the last mayor, was receiving over $1 million. 1 year it went down to $35,000. I don't know how an established program like Head Start receives the same amount of money as the South Norwalk Community Center. You know, this year it went up a little bit, but still, like I said, they were receiving over $1 million. I wonder what they had to do when that $1 million was cut. They did it. You know, we don't want to make some departments or some areas do it, but they did it. And that is a program that is much needed. You know, so it just doesn't make sense to me to keep spending money on the police department over programming if the reason is truly, you know, that we are looking to save money or that there is no money. You know, we need to come to the table and see how we can revamp things. You know, I know that the police department gets money from the government as well as the city, and crime prevention should include programming. It shouldn't just be, you know, police tactics, especially if you're not going to hire more officers, and if it's just going to go to overtime. I think that's just ridiculous. You know, so I just want everybody to just take some time and give that some deep thought. You know, this is, you know, we can change it. Maybe we can't change it this year because, you know, the contract was already voted on, but it's something that we can change in the future, and I hope everybody would be willing to come to the table so that we can get some programs down in our area. You know, if it has to come from some other departments, and that's fine. You know, we can't just have it just, you know, one department just keep climbing and climbing and climbing and never taking a step back to take a look at what we can do better. So I'm not going to vote for this item either, but I hope that in the future we can do something better and include everyone.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Watts?
Yeah, I totally agree with Councilwoman Bowman. The overtime and the contract was an opportunity to reset and try to figure out a way to have the officers come to the table when you were discussing the dirt jobs and understand what it means to, when it comes to overtime and payroll. I think I talked to one of my colleagues out there and said in the real world, outside of government, what jobs are given overtime in this economy? Who's giving overtime? Name some companies that are providing overtime out there. I look forward to hearing it. Name some companies, private companies, where Norwalk citizens are receiving overtime.
Cable Vision.
Mike Stelling.
Cable Vision.
Okay. Small business, okay, that's great. That is the backbone of America, by the way, and I wouldn't be surprised. A lot of people in small business work a lot of hours. So I would expect if there was overtime, it would be in small business. But the reality is overtime across the board in the corporate world is somewhat done away with. A lot of people are, you know, not working as many hours as they should be or could be because of whatever reason. Norwalk has a unique opportunity to reset and try to figure out a way to put more officers on the street. If it requires more funding, I think that no citizen probably would object. What they do object to is the sticker shock when the top 200 employees come out and most of them are in the police department. And you say, well, they're working so many hours and, you know, and that's why they get paid. But maybe we don't want officers working so many hours. Maybe we want them to be fresh when they're out on the street, not straining themselves by working a lot of hours over a long period of time. It'd be interesting to find out if there's any studies out there. What the community is advocating for and willing to invest in is community policing, which the same officers patrol same area and try to grow and get a real community effort where members of the community work with the police department hand in hand. It is vital. So when someone says we don't like the police, that's not true. In government, you don't get to pick your partners. The police don't get to pick their council members. Council members don't get to pick the police. But what we do is we come together as a group to work together to solve community problems, which in the urban communities you see around the country, as you turn on CNN and you see when breakdowns occur, they really occur. And maybe you've never been stopped. I have, as a council member. And the officer was very professional at the end of the day. And that's what I expect when we're put into these situations. Funding is not just about the money, it's about the policy that goes along with it. And there has to be a way to cut spending. And I know right now, someone said, well, you're talking like a Republican. Maybe we are. But The right thing is the right thing. We have to control spending. We have to point out pork in the budget when we see it. And it's not going to make us popular in a system that rewards or encourages you to get along, to go along. It's not me, and as long as I sit in this chair, which, again, I don't know how long I will be here, but while I am here, I will not go along just to get along. I will highlight things that I think need reform, and this needs reform. And speaking to council members offline, you agree that there needs to be reform. And it's not about name-calling when we call for reform to say that we are anti-police. And that's easy to pigeonhole a minority at the time where there is heightened concern. And that's not true. People respect the police. I depend on the police. They are true professionals. I think we have the best police officers here, and we will continue to support them. But what we won't support is policies that we feel don't go far enough, and also a system where funds cannot be applied to the urban core. I'll continue to beat this drum as long as I'm sitting here, that we need to fund things in the urban core. We need to use the same approach to find money to put into these communities. Like in my district, we have the bands and stuff like that over in Freeze Park, and you look at that fence, it's disgusting. That's wrong. Where we have all these visitors coming out in that little park over there, and they see that fence look as bad as it does. And you're tell me that my fence in that park over there can't get new benches, or the fence can't be painted, where we're attracting visitors. The people who put on the performances in that park should be commended and encouraged, and we should fix things in our district. It is wrong when I go by that fence and I see it look the way that it does, and then turn around and you don't have any money to paint that fence, but you do have money to pay for overtime. I think it's wrong, and I will be voting against this as well.
Ms. Stewart, and then Mr. Kimmel.
Just to reiterate, I'd like to piggyback off of what Ms. Bowman said. I too have a problem with the fact that the Head Start money was cut. Reason being, and I will tell you what happened when it was cut. We are so concerned about putting money everywhere else, and we took money out of the community. The Head Start program was thriving at the time. When you cut the Head Start money, you understaffed Head Start. That's what happened. When you understaffed Head Start, not only did the teachers suffer, but the children suffered also. Then you also placed all the Head Start workers, you put them back on DSS services because they couldn't afford to pay for their own medical. They couldn't afford to put food on their tables either, so they had to go back to receiving food stamps. That's what happened when you cut the money for that program. And then you put a whole bunch of people out of work. So that's what happened. And now that was a shame, but I don't see anybody making a plea for that.
Mr. Kimmel?
I don't know if I remember correctly the discussion we had a month or so ago when we were approving the contract, but the issue of vacancies came up and saving money saving taxpayer money through overtime instead of hiring new officers and having to pay for not only their training, which would require some overtime while they're being trained, and pension and health and all that. And it seems to me, I remember $2 million, an additional $2 million per year if we were to have those 9 vacancies filled?
He said
Well, no, not the 9 vacancies. It's in order to staff the police department, in order to not have any overtime.
Right,
It can be done.
yes.
That's where it would cost the additional millions to be able to hire enough people, because you couldn't do it with 179 officers. I don't have the number in front of me, but the staffing survey that I did, I think it required us to have 250 15 or something like that sworn officers in order to staff the department to the levels that we're staffing it right now. But to do it with overtime instead is much cheaper. And in addition, a new officer, over the long term, it's very expensive. You're talking about another pension 30 years later. You're talking about health insurance, you're talking about training, in-service training every year. There's a lot of other costs that go into it. So, yes, ultimately, the cost to pay overtime to staff those areas of the town, those times of the day, and on the weekends when we need extra people, is significantly cheaper to do it with overtime than to have all those officers always here working 7 days a week when we don't need them.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bowman?
Two things. One, you're just saying this. Last time you told us you were actually going to, between you two or the department, someone was actually going to do an analysis. So I would like to see the figures in front of me. And the second thing is, now we keep saying that, oh, it's cheaper to just do overtime. Now, wouldn't you have 40 hours from an officer versus however many? Do you get 40 hours a week out of a person in overtime?
I'm not sure what you mean.
If you hired an officer, you would have that officer for 40 hours. So you can't, when you do your analysis and you do your comparison, I want to see the monetary and then the actual, I want to see a real analysis. I want to see also what the effects are on the street, because if you hire an officer, they may cost you a little bit more, but then you have them for 40 hours. So you can send them out, they can walk the streets, they can walk the beat. So all of those officers that you have, now you have them for additional hours, several additional hours. I think that might add up to thousands of hours if you add, how many officers are we down?
We're not down any, what do you mean down? I don't know.
Don't we have vacancies? I heard you talk about vacancies.
We have 6 vacancies right now.
Okay, so if 6 officers at 40 hours each, what's that, about 300, about 300 hours versus overtime, you might have, that's in 1 week, versus you might have maybe about 10 hours maybe throughout the week for just using an officer for overtime. And we need more officers on the street. We already know that. Especially in South Norwalk, we need people on foot patrol, so we need those officers. So the comparison, just because it's going to be more just because it's going to be more for those officers, you also have them for an additional amount of hours. So when you do the comparison, I want to see the cost breakdown, the comparison in hours. So I want to see the comparison in hours. So if how much do you pay an officer a week to do 10 hours in overtime versus 40 officer to work 40 hours for the week? Of course, you're going to have to pay benefits, but at the same time, you've got them for 40 hours, is my point. You know, you don't have to be down officers at other times of the day or call in others for officers. And then you're employing more people. So that's more, you know, if you actually hire Norwalkers, then you got more people spending money, more people paying property tax as well. You know, you might have young people that can afford to move out of their parents' house now because they have a job, then they can rent an apartment. So what is the real cost or value to the community to actually hire officers? You know, they can shop, they can afford a $1,500 a month rent or whatever it is, or a mortgage. So there's a lot more value that comes in actually hiring these officers instead of just doing overtime, because like we do see, it's only certain people who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars of overtime. And I don't know who's supposed to be anti-police. I actually did talk to police officers about the contract, and you know, they actually, they said they didn't care whether or not we did it now or not, because you know, they've been working without it for too long, and they didn't like the contract in the second place. So, you know, I didn't end up talking to them until after the fact, but if I would have known that in the first place, I wouldn't have voted for it.
Further discussion? Mr. Hamilton, since it was brought up, would you just briefly mention the conversations and the frequent meetings we've had with the Norwalk Housing Authority regarding Head Start?
Sure. I think it is important to recognize that after the Housing Authority took over the Head Start program, the city made a substantial appropriation to support Head Start. So that appropriation, you're correct, it had been reduced essentially to zero because of, and And the decision, by the way, was made by the Board of Estimate and Taxation after the council that particular year had reduced the budget cap by, I think it was about a $2 million reduction to the budget cap at the same time that Neon was experiencing some significant difficulties and questions and concerns in relation to the audit that the federal government had conducted on the Neon operation, the Head Start operation in particular. And that audit indicated that funds had been misspent, including funds that the city of Norwalk had provided to the program had been misspent. So in the context of that situation, a reduction, a $2 million reduction that had been made to the cap by the Common Council when the council set the budget cap, combined with a significant concern that was raised as part of a federal audit of the program, the Board of Estimate made the decision to eliminate the city funding for the city contribution for the Head Start program. The Board of Estimate has
What year
since-
was that?
That was, I believe it was 3 years ago now at this point.
11,
11, 12, okay. I'm not 100% sure which year it was, I'd have to go back, but,
The budget was 12-13. That was when we came in at 1.8 after Dick wanted 3.6 or something like that.
right, I think that's right.
12-13.
So,
you-
but
could-
the long and the
fast
short of
forward
it is
about what we're doing now?
we've had many, many meetings back and forth with the Housing Authority. We've reviewed that budget in great detail and have reached agreement with the Housing Authority of how much money is needed to continue the program at the level of students that were previously being serviced, and the city is making that contribution. I think it's about roughly $350,000 a year.
The question I
city
have is,
contribution to Head
have
Start.
we given them everything they've asked for? Well, in the budget?
Well, there were multiple asks at different times, and we sat down with them and reviewed their budget and found places where some things had been double counted, or there were some items that they agreed didn't need to be funded by the city. And so the number that we settled upon, I believe, was a number the Housing Authority had essentially agreed that was the amount of money that was needed to support the program.
And our commitment to them was that we will continue to meet and give them the money as they see it's necessary?
Right. We've
All right.
continued to have other meetings with them periodically. So, I think it is important to recognize that the city is now providing a substantial appropriation to Head Start.
Can I make a point of order, Your Honor?
Mr. Petrini,
We're
point
getting
of order?
very, very far off the topic. I mean, almost to the point where we might have to take a vote to suspend the rules if we're going to continue on this vein, because there's nothing related to
You're right.
any of this on our agenda. So, I mean, it's just, I understand the clarification,
This
but
was brought up because there is a question in regard to the placement of
that's
the
just
funding.
my personal opinion.
And Mr. Hamilton, if I may, my comment was to address, you made a comment in the NOC hour, which stated that you were amazed how Head Start was able to, Head Start got so much money, but yet the Newark Housing Authority was able to work with so much less. And now you're talking about how Newark Housing Authority is going back and forth and speaking to you, and you're giving them what they need. And they actually admitted at some point they didn't even know what they needed. They were given something that they didn't even know what they were given. And they didn't know what the budget was going to be. And they were totally understaffed when you went there. They didn't even have enough people to man certain departments, so the toddler program wasn't even open when you went there. I can name so many things. You got people with master's degrees making $14 an hour, and you really think that's appropriate? I don't think so. They don't even know what to do with that program, and that was proven also.
Well, I'm not sure there's any comment other than to say, as the mayor indicated, we are continuing to, we meet with them periodically, and I'm sure we'll continue to meet with them as the need arises. arises.
I think we need to put another committee on that so that we can make sure stuff happens.
Any further comments? Seeing none, Mr. Kim will move the item. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, 4 opposed, Ms. Bowman, Ms. Stewart, Mr. Watts, Mr. Sims.